25 miles outside Shanghai is one of China's most significant scientific establishments. Here they make lasers and fire them into the night sky. In laser technology, the Chinese are now only 2 years behind the West. Some say only 6 months, and gaining fast. 7 years ago, China didn't have a laser industry at all. But then the government decided to pour money into science. Now, nuclear fusion, bioengineering, computers and high-powered lasers are all under development. Here, they're firing laser beams at a Chinese satellite to determine its position. It all looks much as it would in the West, and yet Chinese science was historically quite different. For 3,000 years, the Chinese understood the universe another way. Every culture on Earth has asked the same questions. How did life begin? What forces drive and regulate the natural world? The Chinese asked themselves another question. How can man get into harmony with the universe? It's dawn on the top of Qingcheng Mountain in Sichuan province. Every morning at the Pavilion of the Echoes, a Taoist monk, Master Zhang, performs a sword exercise to compose his mind for the day ahead. Master Zhang is teaching young Taoist novices. They will learn from his example how to achieve a perfect sense of balance. Balance is a central concept in Chinese philosophy. Another monk, Master Fu, practices Qigong, deep breathing. This increases the qi, the energy level in his body. Qi, meaning vital energy, is another central idea in Chinese thought. Traditionally, the Chinese believe that the energy you feel in your body is the same energy that drives all of nature and powers the heavens above. It's the pulsing rhythm of the whole universe. To the Taoist, the landscape is alive. Nature is a giant energy field. The Tao means the way or the path you must follow to understand it. Ideally, the heavens, the earth, and man are all in balance, in perfect harmony. If something gets out of balance, then the flow of energy is blocked. Your body gets tired, a plant doesn't grow. This view of reality was not confined to Taoist monks. Most of the Chinese people throughout history have understood the universe this way. Today, the traditional view is still taught by the few Taoist priests that are left.
就形成了一个道字，在2000年以前呀，在这个老子我们的战国时候，春秋末，老子就对道德有个全面的阐释，阐释后就提出了一个道德经。
What's significant in these teachings is not that they're religious or even picturesque, but that they're based on an understanding of the natural world that's as old as Chinese culture itself.
无痕是讲的金木水火土嘛，比如是水，它的本性是下沉，火的本性是上，水火既济，是我的生成。
The Chinese believed there was a balance in nature between two equal and opposite forces called yin and yang. There was feminine and masculine, water and fire, dark and light, and so on. The ancient Chinese Book of Changes, the Yi Jing, was based on the concept of yin balancing yang. This is the yin-yang symbol, half light, half dark. Heaven, the sky, is the lightest, brightest, most yang thing in the universe. Earth is the darkest, the most yin. Everything else is somewhere in between. This symbol represents water. Water is very yin. It trickles downward, quietly, receptively. What he's drawing now is the symbol for the wind. Wind is active, relentless, more yang, more masculine. The Book of Changes taught the Chinese that change was inevitable. It proposed that changes happened when the yin and yang moved out of balance. This is an idea which still governs one aspect of everyday life in China. To this day, the Chinese analyze personal illness in terms of too much yin or too much yang in the body. By eating the right things, they believe, you can put yourself back in harmony with the universe. Every so often, a group sets out from the monastery to gather herbs. They'll spend half a day on the mountain, looking for plants that will balance the yin and yang of their body and restore natural energy. Holistic medicine has been understood for at least 4,000 years in China. A great selection of herbs can be found growing wild if you know where to look. Most valuable, and best known in the West, is ginseng. Ginseng is said to increase the yang element of the body, to heat it up, improve blood circulation, and most importantly for some, to increase male potency. But there are many other roots and plants to be found here on Qingcheng Mountain.
那我们走上头看。
这里面还有一些很好的药。里面有药。
It might have been expected that the Chinese communists wanted to eradicate these ancient beliefs in herbal remedies and yin and yang, but not so. Chinese traditional medicine turned out to be cheap and effective. "20 years ago, the barefoot doctor became a feature of communist China. Today they do have shoes and carry some Western antibiotics. But many of the treatments they bring to the villages are rooted in traditional Chinese medicine. Here on Qingchun Mountain, just below the monastery, Dr. Liu visits a grandmother with chronic bronchitis, a problem that's perhaps not helped by the doctor's smoking. Cigarettes aren't yet seen as a major health problem in China. Chinese doctors set great store by taking the pulse and observing the patient's qi se, literally the way their energy looks. Dr. Liu prescribed Western antibiotics this time and dispensed them on the spot. If the family need herbs as well, they'll gather them from the mountains. But keeping healthy, balancing the yin and the yang, aren't just the preoccupations of monks and country folk. This man lives 40 miles south in Chengdu City, and health is his livelihood. He's a cook at the Tongrentang restaurant, preparing dishes that carefully balance the customer's yin and yang, and preparing them in great quantity. This is, surprisingly, a Chinese health food restaurant. If you can't afford the prices in the main restaurant, a takeaway service is available. Chicken and duck cooked in special herbs from the mountains. You bring your prescriptions and pay in advance. At the pharmacy counter, you can buy extract of lung grass or deer antler and increase your yang at home. But the claim to fame of the Tongrentang is its restaurant and kitchens. Here, the aim is to create dishes which will prevent or cure any illness known to man. Constipation, impotence, asthma, high blood pressure, hair loss. There's something on the menu of the Tongrentang for everyone. Some of the ingredients are hard to believe, but they claim they're effective. The elixir of life is not yet on offer, but a number of old men attribute their longevity to careful balancing of yin and yang in their meals. When you visit the restaurant, you first tell them your ailment. The menu lists the dishes under the disease they cure. Some are general tonics that increase the yin, like duck with caterpillar grass. This is not to everyone's taste. The garnishing is an insect, real caterpillars. The manager is pleased to explain things to new customers.
当初只是提就是特别草，所以冬天是虫，夏天就是草，所以叫冬虫夏草。他就这么个情况。所以这个吃了有什么好处？它主要是润肺，滋阴，这个是很好的。这个水基本上。
Some of the customers find the dish faintly disquieting, but the idea of yin and yang is as familiar to them as anything could be. It's curious for a Western visitor to find caterpillars or fungus or snake on a restaurant menu. It's even more of a shock to visit a modern hospital down the road and find displays of stuffed monkeys. These specimens seem fit for an alchemist's cell rather than a hospital. But none of this is a surprise for the Chinese. There's a hospital of traditional medicine in every large town. Medical students are taught that everything on this table will add yang to the body's balance. Iron filings, sulfur, horseflies, monkey brain, dried body of leech, alligator, anteater scales, even hedgehog skin. Among other things, they seem to increase blood pressure, alleviate rheumatism, and help prevent bladder disorders. It's easy to scoff at Chinese traditional medicine. After all, what can hedgehog do for rheumatism? But many Western cures were once derived from natural substances. It's not as strange as it seems. In the last 20 years, experiments at medical institutes in Shanghai have isolated potent extracts from traditional remedies. New birth control drugs like anordrin and gossypol have been successfully developed from plants. Naturally occurring anti-cancer agents have been isolated. Some of the old cures really work. Laboratory chemistry is nothing new to the Chinese, of course. It was developed over 1,000 years ago by alchemists searching for the elixir of life. From the chemical experiments of the alchemists came one of the classic inventions of China, gunpowder. This is a replica of an early rocket-assisted arrow, designed around the time of the Battle of Hastings and used by both sides in the Chinese-Mongol Wars. The invention of gunpowder was evidently an explosive accident. Alchemists were fond of mixing up sulfur and saltpeter in their attempts to achieve immortality. Some achieved it sooner than they'd intended. Some say the Chinese used gunpowder only for fireworks shows. Not so. This is a 13th century design for a kind of V-2 rocket. The bird projected itself over the enemy, then fell down to earth and exploded in their camp. Nowadays, things like military rockets are dealt with by the ministries of machine building in Beijing. Other matters which might have interested ancient alchemists are pursued in places like this, the Institute of Biochemistry in Shanghai. They developed the world's first artificial insulin here in 1965. Recently, a nucleic acid, which is biologically active, tRNA, was synthesized by this team. This bioengineering work rivals any in the world. But Chinese science is still not entirely the same as Western science. In spite of advances in Western medicine, they're still building new hospitals of traditional medicine in China, and patronage of them is still increasing, to the point where some hospitals find it hard to cope with demand.
你要再问遍的话。
The Chengdu Traditional Hospital deals with 1,500 patients a day on average. 60 doctors are on call, and everyone gets treated in large communal groups. No private consulting rooms here. People can choose whether to be treated at the Western-style hospital or in this one. It's a matter of taste. They surely wouldn't submit to traditional treatment if it didn't work. The question is, how does it work? For example, how can it help rheumatism in the leg to put hot jars on the back? When you push a needle into a little girl's arm, how is that going to help her stomach? A traditional Chinese doctor sets out to understand the whole human being who confronts him. This man's problem is his leg, or so it would appear initially. But he's under stress, not helped by the time it took him to register earlier on and get an appointment. Although the final treatment will be local and often very much to the point, the initial approach is to the well-being of the whole person. Is he well? Does he look well? Chinese medicine sees the human body as a complete organism. The mind and the body are not separate. That's particularly true of acupuncture. Here, a 90-year-old grandmother is about to have an eye operation. The only anesthetic, 2 vibrating needles. While she's still fully conscious, a cataract will be removed from each eye. Some Westerners say that acupuncture is a theatrical effect, like dressing up in white coats. It's auto-suggestion. The patients just think they feel no pain. But ask yourself, would you allow a scalpel to slice into both your eyes while you were fully conscious with no painkiller? The operation is a complete success. With the patient still conscious, the doctor is able to ask her, "How many fingers am I holding up?" And she's able to answer correctly, after being blind for 5 years. But there are still doubts about acupuncture in the minds of Western scientists. So the Chinese have developed some disarmingly simple experiments to prove their point. They paint a heat-absorbing liquid on a rabbit's nose. The animal is suspended opposite a lamp, which is then turned on. How long can the rabbit stand the heat of the lamp on its nose? Six or 7 seconds on average. Now, a needle will be inserted in the rabbit's hind leg at a place that roughly corresponds to a similar point on the human body. Sorting out the pain-killing acupuncture points on animals is not easy, but you soon know if you've been successful. With the needle, the rabbit lasts not 6 seconds, but 12. To understand how and why acupuncture works isn't easy. It's based on an understanding of the human body that goes back at least 1,000 years. Models and charts have been developed to show how mysterious energy lines join the primary acupuncture points. This simply makes no sense to Western doctors. But one thing is significant. Most of the points correspond with important nerve junctions, as we know them. It may be that acupuncture needles stimulate one nerve, which in turn overrides the pain signals coming in from another. In China, however, they explain it differently. They say that energy is meant to flow freely between our various organs and limbs. If yin and yang get unbalanced, then the energy flow is blocked. Cupping with hot glass jars is meant to release the energy flow. This patient has a chronic bladder defect, so jars were placed near the kidneys, as you might expect. But in addition, a needle is inserted in the back of the patient's calf. According to the acupuncture map, an energy line or meridian connects this point with the bladder. A problem with the bladder means too much water, too much yin, and that can lead to rheumatism. To prevent that, a third point on the sole of the foot is stimulated with glowing cigars made from the moxa plant. This will add yang and finally bring the body back into balance. That's the Chinese explanation. The government prefers to stress the scientific basis of traditional Chinese medicine, but no one can deny that it's rooted in ancient philosophy. Above the doctor is a wall chart that reminds the patient of the connection between her energy and that of the cosmos. The message is that the same qi drives the sun and moon as drives her. Her yin and yang should be balanced as should the yin and yang of earth. Chinese medicine is based on the belief that man is indissolubly linked to the energies and rhythms of heaven and earth. To understand yourself, they say, try understanding the cosmos a different way. The Chinese believed that all parts of the universe were interrelated. They spoke of the body as if it were a landscape. Acupuncture points were given names like bubbling spring, penetrating valley, great mountain stream. So it followed that they saw a landscape as if it were a human body. The mountains were the bone structure. The soil was the skin. Rivers were blood vessels. One should respect the earth as if it were one's own body. Some places on earth, as on the body, had special power. These places were like acupuncture points on the body of the earth. The first brick pagodas in China, for all the world like acupuncture needles, were placed in one of these special points in Henan province. They believed the most favorable place to build a temple or a tomb was the point where the flow of energy in the earth was best balanced and therefore most powerful. Finding a good site to build a monument became an art, the art of feng shui. In communist China, it's now frowned on. But when the authorities reconstruct a temple, they take care to see that the original alignment is not altered. Some points on the map are said to have very good feng shui. This tree down the road from the temple has lived for more than 2,000 years. They say it's very well sited, just south of a great mountain. It shelters the students of China's oldest school, the Songyang Academy. For most of the last 1,500 years, pupils have been taught science and philosophy on this site. If a Westerner had been taught 1,000 years ago that the Earth had invisible lines of force underneath the surface, it's likely he wouldn't have believed it. But as it happens, the Chinese were right. The Earth does have invisible lines of energy. And they're explained today in every classroom in China. We call them magnetism. The Chinese conceived of the idea of force lines in the Earth long before they proved their existence with magnets. But the concept fitted into their cosmology perfectly. South was yang, north was yin, another pair of balanced opposites. The West had known that some metals were naturally attractive, the lodestone, for example. But it took the Chinese to realize the directional properties of the magnet. They invented the compass 100 years before the Europeans. Magnetism was one example of the living energy of the Earth. But were there others? Indeed there were. If the Earth was a body, with rivers like arteries and magnetic lines like acupuncture meridians, then it followed that the Earth, like a body, could get ill, out of balance. But how could you tell when this was happening? Chinese peasants have always been close to the Earth and to their animals. Chinese scientists have always noted down natural phenomena. Eventually, a connection was made between the strange behavior of animals and the occurrence of natural disasters. To this day, herds of deer are monitored. If they're off their food or unusually nervous, an earthquake may be imminent. Herds of deer provide just one example. Other people note the laying habits of their chickens, the level of their wells, the curious cries of foxes out of season. This is a village schoolmaster. If his family notices anything unusual, he'll contact the local office of the Bureau of Seismology. It may be the crucial first sign of a coming earthquake. He will also check simple instruments in his cellar, measuring the Earth's tilt and the temperature of the ground. It'll all be noted down. Only in China is society sufficiently organized to correlate this kind of information. 24 hours a day, duty officers stand by for calls from people like that schoolmaster and put together the clues that may predict an earthquake and forewarn them of disaster. When an unpredicted quake hit the coal mining city of Tangshan in 1976, the effects were appalling. Nearly 500,000 people killed or injured, some drowned, some trapped, some crushed to death. It's no surprise that the Chinese have traditionally respected the living forces of the Earth. But why wasn't this earthquake predicted? Perhaps it was because there were so few peasants living in Tangshan. It's a mining town. A year before, the Haicheng earthquake had been predicted to the nearest 24 hours, and the entire population evacuated. The peasants had warned the authorities of strange animal behavior 10 months beforehand, and helped to prevent another disaster. The Beijing Seismic Center covers the Tangshan region. As it happens, a 5.2 tremor on the Richter scale had been recorded here shortly before we filmed. The first steps they took were to see if anyone was hurt. Then the epicenter was plotted and the complete details recorded in case there were aftershocks. On this occasion, happily, no damage was done.
上方山26，那不够25.6。哎，地震局吧？我值班室啊，报一数据啊。
刚才14:28分05秒。
This building houses the Chengdu Regional Seismology Bureau in the southwest. Clerks sift through a mountain of reports received every day by post. The routine seismograph readings, the temperature of the ground, the behavior of the deer and the chickens. From this information, they can begin the careful job of prediction. It's as if these seismologists were taking the pulse of the earth, noting down its bodily signs, deducing its health from the way it looks. This patient work, like that of a careful doctor, may mean hundreds of lives saved. As in medicine, prevention is better than cure. Of course, this work also entails a staggering bureaucracy. All the records are annotated and then kept. They've been doing this for a very long time. On the wall is a map showing earthquakes as circles. Green circles mark older ones, going back as far as 700 BC. Orange circles mark earthquakes since 1900. Keeping track of all this information since the time of the Han Dynasty has been a very large task. It's perhaps not surprising that the Chinese invented paper, because they certainly invented the idea of a civil service. This committee would not have been out of place in Confucian times. It has been engaged for 4 years on compiling the definitive historical encyclopedia of Chinese earthquakes over the last 2,700 years.
郡国27，这就是属于就是没有区字的，没有区字。
他书上就这么笼统一句话，哎，你这些不好，确实。
The Chinese became wise because they committed things to paper in the past. Indeed, printing was used early on for popular almanacs and encyclopedias, both in classical Chinese and in the frontier languages. The civil service was quick to pick up the new inventions of paper and printing. By controlling what was printed, they could control the curriculum of education and decide who learned what. In the field of seismology, there's an unbroken record of almost 3,000 years of Chinese scholarship.
这个很好一个，这个是墓碑。
就是道光30年
8月。
啊，跟那个是一个，跟刚才第一章是一个地震。
这个内容不一样啊，就是说这个人呢，地震震死的，他地震震死的。哦。地震打死的，所以咱们这个道观。
Once again, in this field, the Chinese led the world technically as well as intellectually. They invented the world's first seismoscope in 132 AD. And a reconstruction of it is on view in Beijing. Since all science was in the service of the emperor, the motif is a dragon with a ball in its mouth. It's still not clear exactly how this machine worked, but in principle, below each dragon's head was a frog with its mouth open. If an earthquake happened to the south, then the south-facing dragon dropped its ball into the frog's mouth. Apparently it worked very well. But the Chinese cosmos had 3 parts, not only man and the earth, but the heavens. This is the oldest surviving observatory in China, completed in 1276 AD in Henan province. When the sun shone through the central window, it would cast a rectangular shadow. The lower the sun, the longer the shadow on the measuring block. At this observatory, the length of the year was calculated to 4 decimal points, 365.2425 days. Very accurate indeed. Until the 14th century, Chinese technology was superior to European in almost every field. Their instruments particularly were exquisite. are bronze armillary spheres used to observe, calculate and record the position of the stars in each constellation. Each star was like an acupuncture point in the body of the sky. Invisible lines of force joined stars into constellations. The sky was like a body. The links between heaven, earth and man were as yet unbroken. But here lay the downfall of classical Chinese science. Many cultures have considered celestial events to be ominous if they're hard to predict. Solar eclipses, for example, or the arrival of comets. But the Chinese considered the cycles of heaven and earth to be inextricably bound up with those of man. A major illness in the sky, a solar eclipse perhaps, meant a political or military catastrophe was inevitable. Astronomy was forever bound up with astrology in the public mind, and that, especially in the Cultural Revolution, made it deeply suspect. The traditional links between heaven, earth and man fell foul of modern science and politics. You couldn't prove them scientifically, and they weren't useful politically. It was far more practical to fire lasers at a satellite than to worry about the influence of distant constellations. China is not a rich country. The authorities feel they can no longer afford any science that is superstitious or speculative or even too theoretical. Hence the attraction of lasers. The forces of the cosmos must be made to work for their living in the new China. Energy isn't something that vaguely infuses the universe. It's what cuts through fabrics. Lasers are one of the 8 scientific areas given special priority since 1978. The others are agriculture, energy, computers, space, new materials, high-energy physics, and genetic engineering. All very practical. The Chinese have become good at growing crystals, too. This sort of science is worth the investment. But modern science has not always been so popular in communist China. Countless scientists were humiliated, beaten up, or sent to the fields during the 10 long years of the Cultural Revolution. Most science was seen as Western, decadent, un-Chinese. This is a laser tokamak device in Shanghai, part of the worldwide research into nuclear fusion. This kind of experiment would have been impossible during the Cultural Revolution. The search for nuclear fusion is practical in one sense. It could solve China's energy problems overnight. But the experiment may never be perfected. At least not at the Institute of Physics in Beijing. Here they're also working on fusion like their colleagues in Shanghai, but with less success. Chinese science slipped back 10 years under the Cultural Revolution. But that can't be blamed for everything. Still today, there's too little cooperation between the different academic institutes in China. Scientists in Beijing may have no idea what the people in Shanghai are doing. And, as in the West, a high proportion of money for science is spent on defense. Under the Cultural Revolution, spending on defense was one area that was not cut. In the 1960s and 70s, China triumphantly exploded its own atomic bombs. It was heralded as a massive achievement, which for a poor country it was. But at what cost?
China exploded an atom bomb in the western region of China on October 16, 1964, and thereby successfully conducted its first nuclear test. The success of this test was due to the hard work and the great coordinated efforts of China's workers, engineering, technical, and scientific personnel, and all working personnel engaged in building up China's national defenses, as well as...
This is another victory for Mao Zedong's thought. The final decisive battle will be one of close combat at 100 or 200 meters. At that time, it will depend on who is tougher, who can take a position, who can hold it, who dares to see red on his bayonet. We have the spiritual atomic bomb, which is impossible for the enemy to acquire, and we also have the material atomic bomb. No enemy can defeat it. If the imperialists dare to introduce war on our head,
the Chinese have made extraordinary advances in this century. When the first aeroplane appeared in the sky over China, it was still a feudal state, ruled by a dragon emperor. It is difficult to realize how far their understanding of science has come in the last 75 years. Great efforts still have to be made to convince the average Chinese that practical science is not essentially foreign. Here, students are being acclimatized to the altitudes of Tibet. That sort of science has a clear purpose. But the Cultural Revolution is hard to forget. For 10 years, clever people were pilloried. Many of them still take care not to appear too clever today. And what was once the pride of China, the world's first civil service, has become a vast bureaucracy that's proving difficult to cut back. Red tape in the world of science is enormous. It's impossible to get rid of senior people, even if they're incompetent. China's greatest hope lies in its teachers. Only they can persuade the young to believe in science and not to be too careful and cynical. Happily, China has a great tradition of respect for teachers. That respect has lasted 1,500 years at the Songyang Academy. For 1,300 years, China has had a centralized examination system. Today, in addition, the syllabus and timetable for every school are handed down from Beijing. What they teach in China is certainty. The Chinese say, have always said, that you only learn something by reciting it or doing it over and over again until suddenly you understand it. A student of wushu or kung fu is taught to learn by imitating, by doing. Only then, eventually, will he feel the vital energy of the universe, qi, running through his body. Watch it, then do it, then understand. Here at the temple of Shaolin, the art of kung fu was first practiced. It is still being taught in the same way, still being perfected. Outside the temple of Shaolin are the gravestones of the monks who have taught Kung Fu over the past 5 centuries. They are still revered for their wisdom. It is impossible to tell whether the long history of Chinese thought, of ancient beliefs in Qi or Yin and Yang, of deep respect for the teacher, whether all this will make it easier or harder for them to cope with the problems of the future. But it is clear that their understanding of life on Earth is still profoundly influenced by their history.